Maple Ridge Estates was everything I had dreamed of when searching for my first home. Tree-lined streets with charming two-story houses, each with its own personality yet blending harmoniously into the landscape. I had saved for 10 years to afford the down payment, and when I finally turned the key in the lock of 217 Sycamore Lane, I felt a profound sense of accomplishment. My property sat on a corner lot, giving me a slightly larger yard than my neighbors. The previous owners had neglected the lawn, but I saw that as an opportunity rather than a deterrent. I spent my first 3 weekends pulling weeds, aerating the soil, and planting new grass seed. My colleagues at work teased me about my newfound obsession with lawn care, but I did not mind. This house represented stability after years of apartment living, and I wanted every inch of it to reflect the care of a proud homeowner. The neighborhood seemed perfect at first. Families walking dogs in the evenings would wave as they passed. An elderly couple 2 doors down brought me homemade banana bread as a welcome gift. The sense of community was exactly what I had hoped for when I chose a neighborhood with an HOA. I believed the monthly fees were a small price to pay for maintaining property values and neighborhood aesthetics. I first met Patricia Williams, known as Karen, behind her back by several neighbors, at the monthly HOA meeting in April. She stood at the front of the community center conference room, impeccably dressed in a blazer and pencil skirt, reading violations from a clipboard with stern efficiency. As HOA president, she commanded respect, though I noticed how some neighbors seemed to shrink in their seats when her gaze fell upon them. "And we have a new homeowner with us tonight," she announced, her smile not quite reaching her eyes as she looked at me. "Welcome to Maple Ridge. I trust you have received and reviewed our Community Guidelines Handbook." I nodded politely. "Yes, I have, very comprehensive." "Excellent. Adherence to those guidelines is what keeps our neighborhood beautiful and our property values high." Something in her tone suggested this was more warning than welcome, but I dismissed the thought as paranoia. I was new, after all, and eager to fit in. The first indication that something was wrong came 2 weeks later. I stepped outside one morning to collect the newspaper and noticed unusual marks on the corner of my front lawn where it curved alongside the intersection. Distinct tire tracks cut through the tender new grass I had so carefully nurtured. I frowned, assuming a delivery truck had taken the turn too sharply. But 3 days later, new tracks appeared in exactly the same spot, and again 2 days after that. Someone was regularly driving over my corner lawn, and the repeated damage was creating an unsightly bald patch in my otherwise flourishing grass. I began to take notice of the traffic patterns on our street, wondering which vehicle might be responsible for the continuing damage to my property. I had no idea these innocuous tire tracks were the beginning of a neighborhood conflict that would consume the next 3 months of my life. Nor could I have guessed that the friendly, rule-abiding HOA president would become my personal nemesis in a battle that would ultimately require drastic measures to resolve. The tire tracks became a regular feature on my lawn. Every few days, fresh indentations would appear, always in the same curved pattern, suggesting the same vehicle was responsible. What had begun as a minor annoyance was becoming genuinely frustrating. The damaged area was expanding, creating an unsightly dead zone in my otherwise meticulously maintained yard. I began documenting the damage with my smartphone, taking dated photographs that showed the progression of destruction. After 2 weeks of this, I decided more extensive surveillance was necessary. I purchased a basic security camera online and mounted it under the eaves of my garage, angled to capture the problematic corner of my property. The camera recorded in 24-hour cycles, and I would review the footage each evening after returning from work. For 3 days, nothing unusual appeared, but on the fourth morning, while scrolling through the overnight recording, I froze. At 7:42 a.m., a silver Lexus SUV clearly drove across my corner lawn, cutting the intersection diagonally rather than following the proper curve of the road. I rewound and watched again in disbelief. The driver was clearly visible through the windshield. Patricia Williams Karen was deliberately driving across my lawn on her morning commute. I zoomed in on her face. She did not look rushed or distracted. In fact, she appeared perfectly calm, as if this shortcut across my property was entirely normal and acceptable behavior. The next day I stationed myself near the window at 7:30 a.m., coffee in hand, waiting. Sure enough, at 7:43 a.m., the silver SUV appeared and Julie rolled across my lawn. I watched in stunned disbelief as Karen saved perhaps 5 seconds on her commute at the expense of my property. That afternoon, I approached her house and knocked politely on the door. Karen answered, her expression shifting from surprise to controlled neutrality when she saw me. "Good afternoon, Patricia. I am your neighbor from the corner house on Sycamore," I explained. "I have noticed some damage to my front lawn, and my security camera shows your car driving across the corner regularly in the mornings." Karen's face did not register embarrassment or apology, only slight annoyance. "That strip of land is actually considered part of the common area according to HOA regulations," she stated flatly. "The actual property line is 3 feet in from the street corner." "I have my property survey from when I purchased the house," I countered. "The land extends all the way to the curb, and regardless, driving over grass rather than staying on the road seems unnecessary." Karen's lips tightened into a thin line. "I have been a resident here for 12 years and president of the HOA for 7. I assure you I am quite familiar with the property boundaries and regulations. Perhaps as a new resident, you should focus more on addressing the brown patches developing on your front lawn rather than making accusations against neighbors." I was taken aback by her hostility. "The brown patches are directly caused by tire tracks. I have video evidence." "If you have concerns about property boundaries, you can bring them up at the next HOA meeting," she interrupted. "Now if you will excuse me, I have an important call scheduled." She closed the door before I could respond. The next day, I drafted a carefully worded email to the entire HOA board, attaching photographs of the damage and stills from the security footage showing Karen's vehicle on my lawn. I requested this issue be addressed at the upcoming meeting. 3 days later, I received a terse reply from the HOA secretary stating that corner lots have special easement considerations and suggesting I review Section 8.3 of the Community Guidelines. When I checked the referenced section, it discussed aesthetic maintenance of visible corner properties with no mention of vehicular access or easements. At the next HOA meeting, I brought printed photographs of the damage. When I attempted to raise the issue during the open forum portion, Karen smoothly redirected the conversation. "Speaking of property maintenance," she interjected, producing a folder of her own, "we need to address properties that are failing to maintain consistent lawn health. Section 5.2 clearly states that visible dead or dying grass must be promptly remediated." She did not look at me directly, but several other board members did. The message was clear. She was turning my complaint back on me, using the very damage she caused as a potential violation against me. I left the meeting seething with frustration, realizing this would not be resolved through normal channels. After the disastrous HOA meeting, I knew I needed a different approach. If Karen would not respect boundaries through discussion, perhaps a physical deterrent would communicate more effectively. I visited the local garden center and purchased 24 decorative river rocks, each about the size of a grapefruit. The helpful store clerk assured me they would make an attractive landscape feature while clearly defining the boundary of my lawn. I spent Saturday morning arranging the rocks in an aesthetically pleasing border along the corner of my property. I positioned them far enough from the curb that they would not interfere with normal street traffic, but would definitely prevent anyone from driving over my lawn. I even planted low-growing flowers between some of the rocks, creating a charming garden feature that enhanced rather than detracted from the neighborhood appearance. Satisfied with my solution, I stepped back to admire my work. Several neighbors walking by commented positively on the improvement. One elderly gentleman even remarked, "Smart move with those rocks. They look nice and will keep cars from cutting that corner." My satisfaction was short-lived. Monday morning, I found an official HOA violation notice tucked into my door frame. The printed form cited unauthorized landscape modifications visible from the street and installation of potential road hazards. The notice demanded removal of the rocks within 48 hours, or I would face daily fines of $50. I could scarcely believe what I was reading. Karen had moved with astonishing speed to block my solution. The reference to road hazards was particularly galling since the rocks were entirely on my property, not near the road. I noticed the violation form had been signed not by Karen, but by the HOA vice president, giving her plausible deniability. That evening, I knocked on the doors of several neighbors, hoping to rally sup. Most were sympathetic in private. "She has been doing this for years," confided Jim from across the street. "Last summer she cited the Andersons 3 times for their bird bath, called it an unauthorized water feature." "Why does nobody stand up to her?" I asked. Jim lowered his voice further. "She targets people who oppose her. The Millers challenged her about the community pool hours last year. Suddenly they were getting violation notices for everything: garbage cans visible from the street, unauthorized plant species in their garden, unapproved mailbox design. They ended up selling and moving." Other neighbors shared similar stories, but when I asked if they would support me at the next HOA meeting, most found reasons to decline. "I would like to help, really, but my wife is worried about repercussions. I am up for promotion at work and cannot deal with HOA stress right now. We are planning to sell next year and cannot risk getting on her bad side." Frustrated but undeterred, I contacted the local police non-emergency line to report the ongoing trespassing and property damage. The officer who took my call was polite but not particularly helpful. "This falls under civil rather than criminal matters, especially since it involves an HOA dispute," he explained. "You could file a report, but honestly, it would likely be referred back to your HOA governance structure." Next, I tried the City Code Enforcement Office, explaining the situation in detail. The board-sounding clerk on the phone sighed heavily. "Sir, that is private property within an HOA jurisdiction. The city does not intervene in HOA disputes unless there are serious safety violations or building code issues. Have you tried working through your HOA channels?" Reluctantly, I removed the decorative rocks before the 48-hour deadline expired. The next morning, right on schedule, Karen's SUV drove across my now unprotected lawn. I attended the emergency HOA meeting called to address recent landscape modifications creating safety hazards. I had prepared a calm, reasonable presentation about property rights and the ongoing damage, complete with photographs and video evidence. But I never got the chance to present it. Karen dominated the meeting with a masterclass in manipulation. She expressed grave concern about certain new residents installing unauthorized hard landscaping dangerously close to traffic areas. "I personally witnessed a child on a bicycle nearly crash while avoiding these obstructions," she claimed, though my security camera had captured no such incident. "As board president, I cannot in good conscience allow decorative preferences to override community safety." When I attempted to speak, she skillfully shifted topics to a lengthy discussion about seasonal planting guidelines. By the time the meeting returned to open discussion, most attendees were checking their watches and gathering their belongings. I approached several board members afterward, but they avoided eye contact or made excuses to leave quickly. The HOA secretary, a timid woman named Rebecca, whispered to me as she gathered her papers, "You should know who you are dealing with. Her brother-in-law works for the property management company. Nothing gets past her." Walking home in the gathering darkness, I felt a crushing sense of isolation. The system designed to protect our community had been perverted into a weapon wielded by one person with too much power and too little accountability. I had tried reason, documentation, neighborly discussion, physical deterrence, and appeals to authority. Nothing had worked. As I passed my damaged lawn corner, illuminated by the street lamp, I noticed fresh tire tracks from that morning. Something hardened inside me. This was no longer about grass. This was about justice, boundaries, and standing up to a bully who had terrorized an entire neighborhood. If conventional methods would not work, perhaps it was time for more creative solutions. The situation deteriorated rapidly over the next 2 weeks. Karen seemed emboldened by her victory regarding the decorative rocks. What had been a daily occurrence became multiple daily occurrences. My security camera captured her SUV crossing my lawn not just during her morning commute, but also during lunch breaks and evening returns. The tracks were no longer subtle, they were deep ruts that collected water when it rained, creating muddy trenches across what had once been pristine grass. I attempted to repair the damage several times. One weekend, I filled the ruts with fresh soil, planted new grass seed, and covered the area with protective straw. Within 3 days, Karen had driven through it again, scattering my repair efforts and creating an even bigger mess. The most infuriating development came on a Tuesday morning. My security camera recorded Karen deliberately swerving farther onto my property than her usual path required. She was no longer simply taking a shortcut, she was intentionally maximizing the damage to my lawn. That same afternoon, I found another HOA violation notice on my door. This one cited unsightly lawn conditions and failure to maintain consistent grass coverage visible from the street. The violation carried a $75 daily fine until the issue was resolved to HOA standards. The cruel irony was breathtaking. Karen was deliberately destroying my lawn, then fining me for the damage she caused. I immediately called the number listed on the HOA letterhead and reached the property management company that administered our neighborhood association. After navigating an automated system, I finally reached a human representative. I would like to dispute a violation notice, I explained, then detailed the situation regarding Karen repeatedly driving across my lawn and then citing me for the resulting damage. "Let me look into this for you," the representative said, putting me on hold. When he returned, his tone had changed. "I see the violation has been verified by the HOA president herself. These determinations are at the discretion of the board. You can appeal at the next meeting, but the fines will continue to accrue in the meantime." "This is absurd," I protested. "I have video evidence showing the HOA president repeatedly driving across my lawn, causing the very damage I am being cited for." "Sir, I understand you are upset, but I am just the messenger. The management company enforces the rules as determined by your elected HOA board." Something about his dismissive tone triggered a memory of what Rebecca had mentioned. "May I ask who the account manager is for our HOA?" A pause. "That would be Mr. Roberts. He oversees several communities in your area." "And what is his relationship with Patricia Williams, our HOA president?" A longer pause. "I am not at liberty to discuss personal relationships of our staff. Is there anything else I can help you with today?" I hung up and immediately began researching online. It did not take long to confirm my suspicion. Social media revealed numerous photos of Karen at family gatherings with a man identified as "my wonderful Bil, David." Further searching confirmed that David Roberts was indeed a senior account manager at the property management company handling our HOA. This explained everything. Karen had not just manipulated the HOA board, she had a direct line to the company supposedly providing oversight. The conflict of interest was stunning in its brazenness. That night I sat at my kitchen table, surrounded by mounting evidence of corruption. My lawn repair costs were already over $200. The HOA fines were accumulating at $75 per day. My blood pressure rose every time I heard a vehicle pass my house, wondering if it was Karen making another destructive pass across my property. I could not sleep. At 2 a.m., I stood at my front window, staring at the moonlit ruts that scarred my lawn. A neighbor had mentioned that the previous owners of my house had moved after repeated conflicts with Karen. Was that my fate too, to be driven from my dream home by a petty tyrant with a family connection that made her untouchable? The financial burden was becoming serious. Between the lawn repairs, HOA fines, and the security camera I had purchased, I had spent over $600 dealing with this situation. If the daily fines continued, I would be looking at thousands of dollars within months. I could not afford to move. I had put every penny of my savings into the down payment on this house. I was trapped. As I watched the street light cast shadows across my damaged lawn, something inside me changed. The frustration and helplessness crystallized into cold determination. Karen had weaponized the HOA against me. She had exploited her connections to avoid accountability. She had deliberately damaged my property while smugly hiding behind rules she selectively enforced. I opened my laptop and began researching property law. If the system was rigged against me, perhaps it was time to play by different rules, not by breaking the law, but by using it in ways Karen had not anticipated. There had to be legal methods to protect my property that even an HOA president with connections could not circumvent. I remembered something my father used to say: when conventional doors close, look for unconventional windows. Karen had closed every conventional door. Now it was time to find my window. As dawn broke, I had filled a legal pad with notes and possibilities. My eyes were red from lack of sleep, but my mind was clearer than it had been in weeks. I would not be driven from my home. I would not continue to pay fines for damage I did not cause, and I would not allow Karen to continue her reign of terror over the neighborhood. The corner of my lawn had become a battlefield in a war I never wanted. But if Karen wanted war, she would get one conducted on my terms, with meticulous planning and perfect execution. She thought S. He knew the rules better than anyone. She was about to learn otherwise. The next morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years. This situation required my full attention. I began by consulting my home purchase documents, locating the property survey that had been included in my closing papers. The survey clearly showed that my property extended all the way to the curb on both street sides of my corner lot. There was no HOA easement or common area as Karen had claimed. Armed with this confirmation, I called several local attorneys, explaining my situation briefly and asking if they handled property disputes involving HOAs. Most referred me to colleagues or seemed uninterested in what they perceived as a minor neighborhood squabble. Finally, on my 7th call, I reached Lawrence Chen, who specialized in property rights and had successfully represented homeowners against overzealous associations. These situations are more common than you might think, Lawrence explained during our consultation that afternoon. HOAs serve an important purpose, but they can become problematic when leadership positions attract people who enjoy wielding power over their neighbors. I showed him my property survey, the security footage of Karen repeatedly driving across my lawn, photographs of the damage, the violation notices, and documentation of the conflict of interest between Karen and the management company. Lawrence reviewed everything carefully, occasionally making notes. "You have done an excellent job documenting this situation," he said finally. "The good news is that your property rights are clear. The survey leaves no ambiguity about your ownership extending to the curb. The bad news is that litigation against an HOA can be expensive and time-consuming, particularly when there are personal connections involved with the management company." My heart sank. "So there is nothing I can do." "I did not say that," Lawrence smiled. "There are several options that do not involve immediate litigation. You have the right to protect your property from trespass and damage, provided you do so within legal parameters." He began outlining potential strategies, from formal cease and desist letters to installation of protective measures designed to prevent vehicular access without creating safety hazards. "What about those lawn protection spikes I have seen in commercial properties?" I asked. "The metal devices that are installed at ground level to prevent vehicles from driving on grass." Lawrence nodded thoughtfully. "Properly installed on clearly marked private property with appropriate warning signage, those can be perfectly legal. They are commonly used by municipalities and businesses to protect landscaping. The key is proper installation and visible warnings." That evening, I began researching lawn protection systems online. I discovered a product called Drive Guard, professional-grade steel spikes that could be installed just below grass level. They were specifically designed to deter vehicles from driving on lawns while allowing grass to grow normally around them. They were commonly used in parks, golf courses, and commercial properties to protect landscaped areas from vehicular damage. The product description emphasized their legal status when properly installed on private property with adequate warning notices. They were not designed to damage vehicles deliberately, but rather to provide a significant deterrent that would cause minor tire damage if ignored. The website included testimonials from property managers who had successfully used them to prevent shortcutting across vulnerable grass areas. I ordered the system immediately, along with the recommended warning signs. The website estimated delivery in 5-7 business days. While waiting for the delivery, I continued building my case. I created a detailed map of my property showing the exact boundaries according to the official survey. I compiled all the security footage into a time-stamped video showing Karen's systematic pattern of driving across my lawn. I organized receipts for all lawn repairs and calculated the total financial impact of her actions, including the accumulated HOA fines. I also obtained a copy of our HOA covenants and highlighted the sections regarding property damage, trespassing, and conflicts of interest. Section 12.4 specifically prohibited board members from using their position for personal advantage or to settle personal grievances. Section 8.7 explicitly stated that all homeowners must respect property boundaries and not cause damage to others' property. Lawrence reviewed my compilation and helped me draft a formal letter documenting the ongoing situation. The letter did not mention my planned installation of protective devices, but did serve as official notice that I had documented the repeated trespass and property damage and expected it to cease immediately. Send this by certified mail to both Karen and the HOA board, Lawrence advised. This establishes a paper trail showing you attempted resolution through proper channels before taking protective measures. I also began researching Karen's schedule through casual conversations with neighbors. I learned that she and her husband took an annual beach vacation the first week of August, just 2 weeks away. This timing seemed perfect for installing the protective system while minimizing the chance of immediate confrontation. As the delivery date for the drive guard system approached, I contacted a licensed landscaper recommended by Lawrence. The landscaper had experience installing similar protective systems and agreed to document the entire installation process professionally, including measurements confirming the devices were entirely within my property boundaries. Make sure he takes photographs showing the warning signs being installed, Lawrence advised. The signs are critical from a liability perspective. The pieces of my plan were falling into place. The property was unquestionably mine. The protection system was legal when properly installed on private property. The documentation of Karen's trespassing was thorough and indisputable. The warning signs would provide legal notice. The professional installation would ensure everything was done correctly. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of control returning. Karen had assumed I would eventually give up, worn down by her persistence and connections. She had underestimated my determination. She had chosen the wrong homeowner to bully. As I reviewed my plans one final time, I realized this had evolved beyond protecting my lawn. This was about standing up to a neighborhood tyrant who had abused her position for years. If I succeeded, perhaps other neighbors would find the courage to challenge her as well. This was about restoring balance to a community that had lived too long under one person's distorted authority. The drive guard system arrived the following Tuesday, a heavy package delivered to my garage where it would remain hidden until Karen's vacation. I inspected the contents carefully. The steel spikes were substantial but not excessive, designed to puncture tires when driven over but not to cause catastrophic vehicle damage. The warning signs were bright yellow with clear text. Warning: private property protected, no vehicular access. Everything was ready. Now, I just needed to wait for Karen's vacation to begin. The first Monday in August arrived, and right on schedule, I watched from my kitchen window as Karen loaded suitcases into her SUV. Her husband packed a cooler in the trunk while she checked items off a list on her clipboard, organized even in vacation preparations. By 8:30 a.m., they had pulled out of their driveway and departed for their week at the beach. I waited until Tuesday morning to begin implementation. The landscaper, Miguel, arrived at 7 a.m. with his assistant and equipment. I had chosen this early hour to minimize neighborhood attention, though I was operating completely within my rights. "We will need to mark the installation area first," Miguel explained, unrolling measuring tape and marking flags. "Then we remove the damaged grass, prepare the soil bed, install the protection system, and replace the grass over it. The system will be virtually invisible but fully functional." I watched nervously as they worked, occasionally glancing up and down the street. A few neighbors passed by while walking dogs or leaving for work. Most nodded politely without showing particular interest in the landscaping work. One elderly neighbor paused longer, examining the activity. "Finally fixing that corner, eh?" he called out cheerfully. "Yes," I responded with forced casualness. "It has been getting torn up regularly, just reinforcing it a bit." "Good idea. That Karen has been driving over everyone's corners for years. About time someone did something." The installation took most of the day. Miguel and his assistant worked meticulously, ensuring the drive guard system was positioned correctly and secured properly. The metal spikes were installed just below the surface, covered with fresh soil and new sod that matched my existing lawn perfectly. The warning signs were placed at 3-foot intervals along the property boundary, clearly visible but not obtrusive. "These flags are temporary," Miguel explained, pointing to the small orange markers he had placed near each warning sign. "Local ordinance requires them for 30 days after installation of below-ground protective systems. After that, you can remove them if you want, but the warning signs should remain permanently." When they finished, I could barely tell anything had changed. The corner looked better than it had in months, fresh green sod covering what had previously been rutted mud tracks. The warning signs were the only visible indication of the protection system lurking beneath the innocent-looking G. Res. Miguel provided me with detailed documentation of the installation, including photographs of each step, measurements confirming the system was entirely within my property boundaries, and certification that the installation complied with all relevant regulations. "One more thing," I said before he left. "Can you install an additional weatherproof camera focused specifically on this corner? I want to document any future incidents." The new camera was positioned under the eaves of my house, providing a clear view of the protected corner. It would automatically record any activity in that area and save the footage to my home server. With the physical preparations complete, I turned to final legal precautions. Lawrence had prepared a comprehensive documentation package including 1. The certified letters sent to Karen and the HOA board. 2. The property survey clearly showing my ownership boundaries. 3. Previous security footage documenting the repeated trespassing. 4. Photographs of the damage caused by Karen's vehicle. 5. Receipts for lawn repairs and the protection system. 6. Documentation of the conflict of interest between Karen and the management company. 7. Installation certification from Miguel confirming the protection system was properly installed on private property with appropriate warnings. Everything was in order. Now came the hardest part: waiting. The rest of the week passed with excruciating slowness. I found myself checking the security camera footage multiple times daily, even though I knew Karen was out of town. The fresh sod took root nicely, aided by regular watering and the unusually mild August weather. By Sunday, the lawn corner looked better than it had since I moved in. Sunday evening, my neighbor Jim texted me, "Heads up, Karen's back. Saw them unloading the car about an hour ago." My heart raced. Tomorrow morning would likely bring the confrontation I had been anticipating for days. I reviewed my documentation one final time, ensuring everything was organized and accessible. I set my alarm for 7 a.m., wanting to be fully awake and prepared when Karen typically left for work. That night I slept fitfully, running through various scenarios in my mind. Would she notice the warning signs? Would she heed them? Or would she, as I suspected, continue her entitled behavior until forced to acknowledge the consequences? Morning would bring answers, one way or another. Monday morning dawned clear and bright. I was awake before my alarm, adrenaline coursing through my body. I showered and dressed in business casual attire, wanting to appear professional for whatever confrontation might come. By 7:30 a.m., I was stationed at my front window with coffee and my phone ready to record if necessary. The neighborhood stirred to life as people began their morning routines. Children waited for school buses. Sprinklers hissed on nearby lawns. A newspaper delivery car moved slowly down the street. At precisely 7:43 a.m., Karen's silver SUV emerged from her driveway 3 houses down. She pulled onto the street and accelerated toward the intersection by my house, her usual route. I held my breath as she approached the corner. Either she did not notice the warning signs or chose to ignore them completely. Without hesitation, she turned her vehicle toward my lawn, following her habitual shortcut path. The front right tire rolled over the edge of my property. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. There was a distinct crunching sound as the tire connected with the concealed drive guard system. Then came the unmistakable hiss of air rapidly escaping from punctured rubber. Karen's SUV lurched awkwardly as the front tire deflated almost immediately. She braked sharply, the vehicle coming to an abrupt halt half on my lawn, half on the street. For several seconds she remained in the car, apparently processing what had happened. Then she flung open her door and stepped out, her face a mask of confusion that quickly transformed into rage when she spotted one of the warning signs just feet from her deflated tire. "What is this?" she screamed, storming toward my house. "What have you done to my car?" I stepped outside calmly, phone recording in my pocket. Several neighbors had emerged from their houses, drawn by the commotion. "Good morning, Patricia," I said evenly. "I see you have driven across my lawn again, despite the clearly posted warnings about the lawn protection system." "You cannot put spikes on your lawn," she shouted, pointing accusingly at me. "That is illegal. You have deliberately damaged my vehicle. I am calling the police and my lawyer." "Please do," I replied. "I have thoroughly documented your repeated trespassing on my property over the past 3 months. I sent certified letters asking you to stop. I installed legally permitted protective devices on my private property with proper warning signage, as is my right. Everything has been professionally documented and reviewed. Wed by my attorney." Karen pulled out her phone, fingers trembling with anger as she dialed. "This is Patricia Williams," she barked into the phone. "I need to report property damage and a hazardous condition at 217 Sycamore Lane. Someone has installed tire spikes on their lawn that have damaged my vehicle." While she continued her call, I retrieved the folder of documentation from inside my house. By the time a police cruiser arrived 15 minutes later, a small crowd of neighbors had gathered, watching the drama unfold from a respectful distance. The officer, a middle-aged man with a weary expression, approached us. "What seems to be the problem here?" Karen immediately launched into her version of events, gesturing wildly at her damaged tire and my lawn. "He has installed dangerous spikes on his property that damaged my car. I want him arrested for property damage and creating a public hazard." When she finally paused for breath, the officer turned to me. "And your side of this?" Calmly, I presented my folder of evidence. "Officer, I have been dealing with this resident repeatedly driving across my lawn for 3 months, causing significant damage. I have security footage showing dozens of incidents. After multiple attempts to resolve this through HOA channels failed, I legally installed a standard lawn protection system on my private property, with clear warning signs posted. Ms. Williams chose to ignore those warnings this morning." The officer reviewed my documentation with increasing interest, particularly the time-stamped security footage showing Karen's repeated trespassing. He examined the warning signs, which were clearly visible from the street, and noted the property survey confirming my ownership of the disputed corner. "These protective devices are installed fully within your property lines.